Come on. It looks mostly like a dog. Doug, I have seen what you humans call dogs, and that does not look even remotely like a dog. The Gen-Sap straightened, looking with suspicion and disgust at the creature skittering and mewling in the no-man's land beyond the ditch. Who knows what kind of diseases or toxins it might have? Hell, this little backwater is barely notable for anything other than being gravitationally ideal for long-distance FTL jumps, and that monster certainly wouldn't be winning any awards for aesthetics on either of our home worlds. The Gen-Sap were, as the humans sometimes unkindly put it, uptight and stubborn, rarely daring to enter the field themselves unless their families had impressive amounts of debt and obligations to repay to the state. Sequat, I'm sure even you can tell this poor critter needs help. Accentuating his statement, the creature made a small squealing whine, sounding to the Gen-Sap like a claw being drawn across metal. Come here, little one, Doug said. Sequat snorted with annoyance as the human mercenary held out a piece of ration stick toward the creature. Its body and furred eye stalks tilted upward, and it scuttled forward on 6 shaggy, crab-like limbs, making a clicking coo before skidding back as there was the sound of a snapping branch. Immediately, Sequat and Doug's rifles were up, passing over the empty forest to find the source of the sound. Squinting, Doug saw the glint of dappled sunlight off an armored helmet and brought his rifle up, squaring on it and firing. In response, he received an inhuman screech of pain, and he mashed his radio communicator. Contact made. I repeat, contact made. 5 clicks east of the perimeter, at least 1 more yen. Target injured. Unsure if neutralized. He received back a crisp and curt acknowledgement from the Gen-Sap controller and cautiously approached where he had fired on. As Sequat covered him, he scanned the foliage for any trace of the enemy, but all he could see was a shimmering purple trail of blood leading back into the underbrush. Doug clucked his tongue. Looks like I just winged them. The alien made a sound of disappointment and shrugged, saying, At least it seems you sent them fleeing back to where they came from, gesturing toward the direction of the enemy lines the blood trail led to. I suppose, Doug said reluctantly. He still wasn't sure if the mercenary life was right for him in the long term. Humanity had found a lucrative niche in being guns for hire, typically hardy and able to eke out a stubborn existence on almost any world they were deployed to, renowned for excellent speed and marksmanship as well as a surprisingly broad resistance to biological weapons and poisons. Even so, Doug had done a little research after finding out his assignment nearly 3 months ago, and it was his unspoken, private opinion that the Gen-Sap and the Morians were simply being stubborn and stupid in refusing to come to any sort of peace talks. Still, he had some hope. He held out some hope that at some point he might be able to talk some sense into Sequat, seeing as the alien soldier's significant combat record held a surprising amount of sway among many of the Gen-Sap leadership. When Doug looked up to try to find the creature that had first caught his attention, there was no sign of it. Seeing where his compatriot was looking, Sequat scoffed softly and said, All for the best, I wager. Next thing you know, you would have named the damn thing, and then we'd never be rid of it. Doug nodded sadly, but as he turned, a smile caught the corner of his lips. The piece of ration bar he'd thrown over was gone. The Gen-Sap could be on us at any moment, Frederick. As I told you before, sir, said the gangly human, Fred. It's just Fred. We Morians do not appreciate these truncations you humans are so fond of. Nicknames are an inaccuracy and a weakness that will get you killed by some Gen-Sap lurking in the dash. The alien spun, screeching wildly as he pulled out his pulse pistol and fired. The plasma round obliterated a small boulder, and from behind it, there was a screech and scuttling, followed by a mewling whimper. Looks like all you did was skill an innocent rock and spook the local wildlife, said Fred, holding up a hand for caution. He still had his rifle cautiously at the ready, but it was obvious, even in the poor lighting of early evening, that this was just indigenous fauna and not some sort of gensap saboteur. He was surprised that the commanding officer had even wished to accompany him on the field patrol in the first place. Fred and the other humans in his defense unit had grown up on Mars and had admittedly poor night vision without mechanical assistance, but it was apparently better than the Morians had. Commander Brid had been jumpy ever since they left the walls of their forward operating base, and the most life or activity Fred had seen all night, or indeed the entire week before, was nothing more than the occasional flitting creature flying overhead and small scuttles from fauna scurrying away underfoot. Speaking of which, he turned to the creature that had been mewling and whimpering. An odd shrieking noise that still conveyed agitation and uncertainty even across vast gulfs of biological differentiation from Martian-born human biology and, whatever the hell this was. Moving slowly so as not to spook it further, Fred burrowed down in his pocket until he felt the edge of nub fruit. They tasted like someone's old, wet gym socks had somehow found a way to infest the inside of a vaguely banana-scented apple, but evidently humans were the odd ones out. Many of the other alien mercenaries spoke quite highly of them, and stated that humans were the only ones they had met so far who found them anything less than tasty. There was even one of Fred's fellow Martians who said they tasted deliciously creamy, and didn't seem to notice much of a gym sock flavor at all. He was either a lucky or unfortunate individual, depending on how one looked at it, and had received the lion's share of the fruit rations the entire unit had been afforded. Gently rolling the fruit over to the creature, Fred felt a moment of apprehension as the sound and movement caused the creature to suddenly scuttle backward, eliciting something between a strangled whimper and a gasp from the officer beside him. But Fred had been careful to put himself between the commander's itchy trigger finger and the poor creature ahead of it. The last thing he needed was for some fuzzy, unfortunate whatever this was to be blasted to kingdom come by a commander that Fred had mounting suspicions had only been awarded his station through sheer nepotism. He could feel his apprehension release as the creature took a cautious step forward, picked up the nub fruit, and turned to leap into the underbrush. The flurry of movement elicited another yelp of surprise and a wild shot from the commander, but it had gone well and truly wide of its target. Still, that was 2 shots in as many minutes, and it was only a matter of time before one of the gensap came to investigate. "I think we've hit the end of this leg of the patrol anyways," Fred said, turning to step back. As he started walking back, he still snuck a look over his shoulder, imagining the creature was sitting in the brush somewhere, eating the fruit with more gusto than he or any of his friends could manage. "Fuzzleg? Mr. Fuzzleg? Where are you?" Behind Doug, Sequat sighed in exasperation. "A name? Really?" Doug claimed this was only his 3rd time being out to this stretch of the patrol route, but Sequat had his suspicions otherwise given how familiar the humans seemed to be acting. Sure enough, he took a step back in concern as some of the bushes rustled, raising his rifle, but Doug was already down on his knees, saying, "Oh, that's a good boy. Come here, boy." And in response, receiving a shrieking coo as a scuttling mass of fur and legs burst out of the leaves and crossed the short opening in the glade with a surprising amount of speed. The creature extended a long, thin proboscis and began wiping it across Doug's face. Doug chuckled, doing his best to wipe some sort of liquid it emitted off and saying, Now, no kisses. No kisses right now." Sequat stared in disbelief. For all the human knew, the creature was simply tasting him to determine if he was something that could be consumed. The gensap had seen far smaller creatures inflict far greater damage on prey they were hunting, but the humans seemed oblivious to the threat, and scratched underneath the creature's mandibles as if interacting with a harmless domesticated pet. The scratching caused the monster to awkwardly tilt to one side as 2 sets of legs began spasming, attempting to itch the area being scratched. The eyes on the end of its stalks half-closed as the creature let out a keening series of rapid-pitched yips. "Oh, I think he likes it," said Doug, chuckling and pulling out a ration bar. Sequat sighed. "Human, You know, it's not ideal for being fighting ready if you continue to withhold vital nutrients for yourself to feed this. The alien paused for a long moment, searching for a suitable word that was not reflexively or instinctively insulting. Creature, he finally settled on. Those nub-flavored ration sticks are almost impossible to eat anyway. Doug chuckled, offering it toward the alien soldier, who accepted it with a confused look. Taking a bite, he said in a muffled voice through his set of double jaws, busy chewing the ration bar. I don't see why you humans are so opposed to these. The flavor is really quite pleasant. Doug merely gagged, only partially acted out, as the scent of the ration bar wafted over. But when he offered another to the creature, it made a crooning noise and quickly tore apart and swallowed the ration bar. I'm still not convinced this is a wise idea, human, Sequat said. It is unclear if the Morians are nearby. They may even now be waiting in ambush, with this creature as the bait. Doug chuckled. You folks don't seem to care much for whatever's native to these rocks we're fighting over, so I don't think there's much risk of that. He straightened, stretching as the crab-like creature scuttled in a little circle around his legs, peeping happily and play-fighting with one of Doug's dangling webbing straps on his calf. He smiled but then made a gentle shooing motion toward the creature. The creature had been quite thrilled and was reluctant to leave them alone, but eventually, it turned and ran back toward the underbrush, pausing only to take one last look back over its shoulder toward the human before disappearing into a hollow between some fallen logs. Sequat strongly suspected that, given the human's passion for the disconcerting creature, this likely would not be the last they saw of it. Fred gently tossed an object up in his hands, catching it, a deft show of skill he didn't mind showing off in front of his commanding officer. The Morians, while keen of eyesight and, with exceptions like his commanding officer, typically quick of wit as well, still lacked the hand-eye coordination that humans possessed. This allowed him to show off slightly, tossing and catching the item with a metallic clink as his eyes scanned the bushes. Commander Brid let out a muted shriek of concern. Frederick, do you wish to alert every gensap within the sector that we are here? Fred was quite sure that any gensap were dozens, if not hundreds of clicks away, as the last report of any encounter with them in this region had been weeks and weeks earlier. But he also knew deference was still required to his superior officer. So, putting on a firm and obedient smile, he nodded and said, As you perceive, Commander. Evidently, the slightly backhanded agreement did not go unperceived, and he caught the alien officer muttering something about blasted clones under his breath. That rankled a little, but Frederick knew it was far from uncommon. He, along with most of the rest of his brigade, had volunteered as clonal troopers, their memories flash-preserved at the beginning of every evening rest. With sufficient cell stock and spawning tanks, nearly half their units' numbers could be regrown in a matter of weeks should they suffer severe casualties. It was a convenient way to preserve combat experience, but Frederick had to admit it played merry hell with long-term memories, particularly those related to skills and events unrelated to combat. Of course, he was pretty sure the begrudging, barely tenable acceptance of command authority and authority in general was just his own personal preference. But the irregularities caused by flash imprinting provided a convenient scapegoat. Holding the object, he jingled it slightly and called out, I've got something for you, bud. The Malorian tilted his head quizzically. What is that, Frederick? Is that what you were trading with the weaponsmith for earlier? It's Fred, sir, said Fred, with more than a little hint of annoyance. And yes, I didn't have access to a welding torch to cut the shape and burn in the lettering I needed, so I had to barter a little for it. He held up the old strap part of some unused webbing from his satchel, and a glimmering tag on it that read in rough lettering pudgepot. It was a name echoing a vague recollection of what they had called a slobbery, blunt-faced dog he'd had as a kid, so many decades and lifetimes ago. The alien officer scoffed. The lack of access was by design. Humans were not seen as especially trustworthy when it came to matters such as the use of crafting and engineering equipment. More than one story had circulated about human mercenaries, flash-cloned or otherwise, using what seemed like simple construction tools to create abominations that sometimes bordered on the verge of war crimes. "This object you've created is for this wild creature?" he asked hesitantly. "I thought this was not typically something given except to domesticated companion animals." "Oh, well, typically, I suppose," said Frederick. A few fuzzy, incomplete memories trickled in. Visiting a friend's house, playing on the red sand dunes with his pet iguana, the name tag glittering in the low sun. "I suppose it depends on what your definition of domesticated is." The human let out a low whistle, and a few moments after a nearby bush rustled. Fred grabbed the commander's arm, stopping him from instinctively raising and firing as he had done several times before. This time, the commander made a frustrated noise but said nothing, simply glaring at what might otherwise have been seen as unacceptable impertinence. But at this point, Commander Brid had begun to begrudgingly admit that the human might be slightly better aware of when to discharge a weapon and when to conserve ammunition.